A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Recently on 2020, we were so privileged to have a guest called Stewart Bogle from Resilient Souls. He's a podcaster, a Bible teacher, and an author of a book called Learning to Dance in the Darkness. And he began to tell us his story of some of the challenges he's faced in life. And he joins us again today. And Stewart, I'm just going to recap on the last segment we did together. You mentioned how your first wife died tragically of cancer. You remarried, but it wasn't a happy marriage. Your son faced a real challenge with accidentally starting a fire which spread on the hills of Adelaide, and just so many things you had to face in your life. But I want you to continue on your story now, please, Stewart, on other things that happened after that.
I felt like I was a train wreck, and every time I was sharing with people, my name would come up on their phone. They must have been thinking, what's coming next? And so I tried to keep it to myself and deal with it myself, but once surgery came, I couldn't deal with that. So had my son going through the courts for a year before he was exonerated, and then I thought I'd just catch my breath and everything will work out now. And then I woke up one day, well, actually before I woke up on that occasion, I remember going for a bike ride and thinking, this is wonderful. I'm just having a fantastic ride through the hills and just starting to enjoy life again. When out of nowhere, a car came and just sideswiped me, and I went headfirst into a huge gum tree. And I remember last thing I said was, oh no, and I hit it and I woke up, I don't know how much longer later, but I remember lying there head against this tree, people all around, people saying, don't move. And I was aware enough to go, I better wiggle my toes and find out if I'm in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. And fortunately I wasn't, but I'd done some real damage. So I ended up in hospital, cracked collarbone, broken ribs, but the worst damage was a brain injury. And so for the next year I was trying to deal with a brain injury. So that was really a series of events before the next big one came after that. So just any questions on those ones, Andrew? Because there's a fair bit in there, isn't there?
Yeah, mate, I can't believe what you've had to go through in life. How old were you when you had the bike accident?
It's probably late 40s, mid to late 40s, just really enjoying the bike riding and getting out again and starting to see some light ahead and thinking, this is going to be great. But that was a really bad. And then the next year was just so difficult to handle, because for those of you who have had accidents to do with the brain, it's very difficult because everyone can see on the outside and say, look, he's recovered from the shoulder injury, his ribs are fine and life's going great again. But I just couldn't function in the same way. It was affecting my work. It was affecting my family. It was affecting my confidence. So I was really battling with that and trying to work out what to do.
Yeah, man. And in the midst of all this, Stewart, like as a Christian, how do you reconcile all this? I mean, do you get tempted to think you've done something wrong and you're somehow being punished, or you just think it's like a spiritual attack, or do you just think you're just unlucky? Like, how do you process all this?
That's a great question. I had a lot of time to process these things, but I think given what I'd been through over the years before, I'd already determined that I wasn't going to get the answers from God that I wanted. I wasn't caught up in worrying about whether I'd got enough people praying or whether I could twist the arm of God with the right words in prayer. I'd sort of come to terms, I guess I'd call it radical acceptance, that I'd radically accepted that these things were happening. I didn't know why. I didn't know why they seemed concentrated in my corner, and whether it was a spiritual attack or it was just bad luck, I was going to address it the same way by turning to Jesus and handing it to him. And, I really struggled, I think, over this whole journey with people's responses, because I broke it into two responses. I think there were a group of people that I called the Cirque du Soleil people, who did acrobatics to absolve God of responsibility, and they'd find something in everything, that, oh, you're going to be a great preacher now that your wife's died, you'll be able to relate to people. And I just found that really unhelpful. And then there were the fatalists, the conservatives that say, oh, this is a dark world we live in, and wait till we get to heaven, we'll all be restored. And I kind of thought there has to be something in between. But you are probably on the right track to thinking, I think I had a view that there was the quid pro quo of the Christian life. If I did X, Y, and Z, then God would turn up and do A, B, and C. And that just didn't happen. So I had to accept that stuff was happening, had no idea, didn't know what was behind it, didn't know why it was being allowed, but I just had to get on with life.
Yeah, and so you said that after the accident and the brain injury, something else happened as well?
This is almost comical, but it was incredibly painful. it was a year after the accident, and I was really not doing well with a brain injury, trying to work out whether I could keep working or not. And I went and saw my specialist, and he said, you need to have a month off. I think you've been trying too hard to recover. Have a month off, and I want you to do nothing. No emails, no nothing. And let's see if you can recalibrate, get that brain kicking back in again. So about 28 days into the month, I was a bit distressed, and I went back to see him, and he said, "What's up?" And I said, "I am not improving at all." And he said, "I was afraid of that. That means it's a permanent brain injury, and you need to change your lifestyle. You need to reduce your work hours. You need to not get stressed. You need to just learn to relax in life and change your lifestyle. I'm really sorry, there's nothing that can be done." So I went home feeling a bit flat, thinking, how am I going to do this? And the next morning, it's crack of dawn, my kids woke up and I heard voices saying, "Dad, there's something in the roof." And I called out to my daughter and I said, "Let's just go back to sleep. It's probably a possum." And then my son came running down and said, Dad, I think there's a fire." And then I heard voices outside, and I jumped out of bed and went to the front door, and there was a crowd of people out the front, and they were saying, "Get out, get out." And so I grabbed the kids and we ran out the front, and I turned around, and there was smoke billowing from the roof. There'd been an electrical fault in the air conditioning on the roof of the second story, and it had caught fire on the house, but it had been contained in the ceiling, so even the smoke alarms were not going off. And so I stood there watching my house burn down and going, "You've got to be kidding." And I just couldn't believe it. I just went, I'm supposed to be coming up with a lifestyle that's stress-free and working out how to cope in life. And then I watched my house burn down with the memories, and then the roof collapsed, and I realized the roof collapsed where my kids were sleeping minutes after they escaped. And you go, what's this about? So that was a tough one. Everyone was there. We had helicopters over the top and police and crowds, and within 3 or 4 hours they left, and it was just the last SES worker who said, "Don't go in there." But I said, "Well, what do I do?" And he goes, "Sign this form and then hope you got good insurance." And that was it. So left on our own to work out what to do. So it was almost, I say it was a bit comical, because you got to be kidding. Like, come on, enough's enough. But you got to deal with it.
Man, that's like serious trauma you've been through, Stewart. Like just I can't even imagine, mate. But I guess what I want to ask you is that what did you do after that? What do you do after something like that? Like, what's the next step?
Well, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm super spiritual, because I'm not at all. But I've got a belief in life that when you come to God, you say to him, "Here's my life, and I want to give it to you no matter what." And I did that at 18, and I think I was rather naive, because I kind of expected that to be a life of, service and reward. But I did make that commitment, so I decided to keep going. And I also used to be a teacher in a Christian school for many years, and I noticed a lot of kids and a lot of families, at some point something happened and they turned away from God. And you understand it. A marriage breaks down, a child dies, something happens, and people go, "Enough, I don't want a God like that." So they turn away from him. So that led me to really think through, what is it that causes some people to turn to God in the storm, and what causes other people to turn away from God in the storm? And so I've been really curious about that for a long time, and that's partly the focus of the Resilient Souls podcast. But in my own life, I just made that decision. I was going to follow God no matter what, and I haven't enjoyed the no matter what. Would have changed it if I'd been God and where I could write the script, but things happen, and you've got to learn to deal with it, and you've got to decide whether you're going to do it with God or without God. And I'm choosing to continue to do it with God.
Man. Well, I'm just in awe of you, to be honest, Stewart. Just your determination and your faith and your faithfulness to God. And here you are. So how long ago was that when the house fire happened?
That was about 4 years ago now. So yeah, it's been, even, and this isn't, well, it is my trauma too, but since then, my daughter, who's really close to me, she's been through all of these things as a child and now grown into a beautiful young woman. She married her childhood sweetheart, and the long story short is he got cancer as well. And try as we might, pray as hard as we did, plead with God, he passed away only a few months after they got married. So those challenges have continued, and I see my daughter as, it's only a year since he passed away, and she's really battling. She's on her own. She's got a lot of questions, but very similar to me. She's choosing to turn to God, and I did a podcast where I interviewed her, which is one of the more difficult ones to do. But she didn't have all the answers, but she does have a relentless faithfulness and trust. Not that everything's going to work out, but that she's never going to be alone, that God is always with her. So, yeah,
Can I ask, how old was her husband when he passed away?
He was 28.
Man, and how old was your daughter?
She's 28 as well. So, and they'd only been married. They'd been living apart. He was in the Navy, and she'd been living apart and on and off. And then they'd chosen to to live this life of long distance. And then they finally got to be together. And you go, now it's all about, the sun's about to come out. It's all going to be wonderful. And it's been it was harrowing for them. So, and the thing I know is, and a lot of listeners will resonate with this too, life is full of challenges for everybody. And we have these heavily curated, social media profiles, and we only let people know a little bit of our story. But we want to get to that point where you can just sit and be real and honest and say, I'm struggling in my marriage. I'm struggling with teenage kids. I'm struggling with, finances. I'm struggling with health. There's a whole lot of things we're struggling with. And to learn to, as the scripture says, to rejoice with those who are rejoicing and to mourn with those who are mourning, and not just try to sugarcoat everything or find a spin on it. So I think I wouldn't have wanted to go through any of this stuff, honestly. But the fact that I've had to go through it, I don't want to waste the pain. I want to use it to help people. And I don't have the answers. None of the guests I have on my podcast have the answers. They just have a story to say, this is how I'm going through the storm, and this is what's helped me to keep my eyes on God.
Yeah, it's so encouraging and so humbling, Stewart, to hear your story and your daughter's story now as well. And I want to encourage our listeners to check this podcast out. It's called Resilient Souls. You might know someone that's right now going through a storm, or maybe you're going through a storm, or maybe you've just got a heart to help people in your local church or your faith community who maybe will be going through a storm down the track. It's called Resilient Souls, and you can check out Stewart Bogle on resilientsouls.com.au. On that website, you can also find access to a book he's written called Learning to Dance in the Darkness, which is a great title, which is all about, as it says, learning to face difficulties in life and maintain your faith and even find that strength, that inner strength, which is called the joy of the Lord. But Stewart Bogle from Resilient Souls, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story so honestly and so transparently, and just really encouraging so many of our listeners today.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I really do hope people find some hope in their darkness, and they know that they're not alone and there's a way to get through.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.